Hello, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Problems of Ageism by Reginald White Jr. And here's your narrator, also Reginald White Jr. Hope you enjoy the show. The problems with ageism are workplace discrimination, hiring bias, technology exclusion, stereotyping, and media representation. With these five key basic terms of how ageism is, a problem for people in this time and era, since we're in a new technological era. For we'll use technology exclusion for example. Like, think about it like this, all right? You're someone's mom. Like, think about it from like my being type perspective of being like like you could be like my mom is like from a generation where tech wasn't really advanced per se. Like they grew up, they had cursive, they had to go to libraries and look up everything manually versus where like a kid nowadays has like just a flick of a finger and they have access to whatever information they want that they can find on the internet. Whereas, that kind of makes it an exclusion for someone like her because like she would be like an older person and not understand some technological concepts because like some kids were grown and growing into it, like me. Like I grew along with the development of like the tech from the last 20 years realistically. I understand tech better than like a 6 year old man that was like, I don't know, just playing kick the can when he was a kid growing up and didn't have tech at all. Which is kind of also leaning in towards my other points about stereotyping because that was kind of like a stereotype right there, used as an example. You know, I mean, like, there's a fine line between stereotyping and, the truth. But like there are times where a stereotyping is actually the truth about something because you know that's just making assumptions versus telling facts, and some facts can end up being a true stereotype. And here's what the history of ageism. I just wanted to show you like this picture because like it explains about 82% experience one or more forms of everyday ageism in their day-to-day lives because and and I can honestly see that this is a reasonable statistic number because with the internet and how people are nowadays, people behind a screen will act very tough compared to being in person with someone. Like, like I understand, like that's actually with that in the back of my mind, I can honestly think that's pretty accurate to say because like and going on to our other points of 65% exposure to ageist messages, 45% ageism in interpersonal interactions, and 36% internalized ageism. And honestly, I can see how these are like I'm not saying that these numbers are up to date, but I found this picture as a it was a recent picture, so to say. So I'm not saying or confirming or denying that it's still the same numbers now, but it's better. Not better, but that was at the time. This was the true statistic at which these numbers made sense because we're in an era of like tech technology is a big thing and a part of our people. It's like Like you don't see anybody walking around without a phone unless they're like a really they're in a really bad situation or like they're a homeless person. But because like phones have become so essential that they just never really leave our sides. Some people are addicted to it even. But I'm gonna continue on with the history and actually get into some. Because think about this. In ancient times, the older folk were used in society as advisors, teachers, scholars, and those who passed down the knowledge they knew of. That was kind of the whole point of like when you were the older ones of the generation from the previous generation. You were like smart enough to live long enough to show the new generation how things work and do, which essentially, you know, is a great achievement in the history of mankind because we started from sticks to cell phones by passing down information from each generation. Okay. Anyway, on my next thing, in between the 18th and 19th centuries, the Industrial Revolution brought significant changes to the workforce, favoring young, able-bodied workers who could handle the physical demands of factory work. This shift reduced the societal value placed on older workers as their labor was perceived as less efficient or valuable. And I can see why people would assume so because with the younger bodies in the industrial revolution, which was more of like factory work, moving these heavy parts and working long hours to get good pay to go home. It it's just after a point because I've done factory work too. It's like when you get to a certain age, it's like you really don't want to do factory work after a certain age. And that's coming from me, and I'm still like a young, able person. Like, just think about like these guys who are working on trains and making all these big industrial sized machines, and you knew they weighed a lot because like back then it wasn't like anything intricate like today's time where we focus on like making things cheaper and way less. But they use like they had to start out rough with like heavy machineries and all this kinds of stuff that was like the older people shouldn't be messing around with because like it was so heavy they could have like got an injury. Like for example, in one class, like I was told about like an old worker, he got injured because he was just simply too old. So I'm not saying that as to be against old people, but stuff happens. I'm gonna just move on. To combat ageism, we should, you know, have awareness campaigns, use legislation, inclusive hiring practices, intergenerational programs, and media representation. And it's true. We if we can make ageism aware to people throughout any ways we can, like through using the government or social media, you know, it'll help people understand places that are more friendly towards people who are up there in age. I'm not saying that going to somewhere else specifically because you are older is like and like getting turned down from another place because you're old. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but more like in some cases, realistically, it's best that you shouldn't be that old working in some jobs. I mean, I'm not saying to discriminate on old people or young people because of their age, but in some jobs, you really need to be like a certain age to work certain jobs. Like within the workplace, with seniority within the workplace. I'm sorry, within the workplace, there is an unspoken ranking of who has been there longer of sorts, which is true because, like, for example, older workers can use their influence at work to unethically abuse their coworkers, or employers may assume older workers are less tech savvy or less adaptable to new technologies. Like these are two examples of like an old worker being in a position to where they can use their intellect from being in a position longer to move the younger workers out the way so they can still keep getting money and building their influence. And the other is where they might need a younger person who might understand something about what the technology that they could be using in the workforce. I mean, people can assume all they want, but it's best to not assume things about other people without knowing anything about that person. And that's why that there's probably a lot of works lawsuits that were against people because not people, but like against some workplaces because they thought old people couldn't do this, and then they sued, and you know how that goes. But yeah, and then with hiring buyers due to ageism can occur in several ways, where older candidates are unfairly treated or overlooked in favor for young applicants. Which, like I had mentioned earlier, because like you're older than somebody, they could need somebody in a position that knows what they're doing for a specific job. Like you can go, like, for example, for college, you go there to be a doctor. You go there, get your do your classes, then go to med school. Like that, like that's what they want from people who are older because they know that they have like the degrees, the time, and you know, uh, what you call it. They did what they needed to do to get that license to become a doctor, which took some time. And so yeah, okay. Technological exclusion. Older dark adults can be unintentionally marginalized in a world that increasingly relies on technology, further deepening social and digital divides, which is true because like tech is just going to keep advancing, and then there's just the older generations that are just too old and like don't really understand how things work anymore because we just evolved and developed things in our daily lives beyond a point to where they can't mentally comprehend how the thing works. Like the silent generation is kind of basically on their way out and they're not really up there mentally. And then the generation right after them are following suit and they don't really like understand how like how a TikTok works or like how Instagram works, that kind of thing. And then stereotyping, as I mentioned before, through stereotyping involve involving making broad, often negative generalizations about people based solely on their age. I mean, we all do it because like each generation be like has the stereotyping of like how the younger generation is just lazy or there's always some gripe about the older generation hating the younger generation or the young generation want to always like rebel against the older generation, which is true and way seen a lot actually. And then in media representation, it's been true. We've seen it in movies and Hollywood. There's like a lot of examples. I'm gonna be honest. And let's just try to be better. Like I know old people and young people don't really get along, but we should all just try. I believe in us. This has been Reginald White.